This Family Life News podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you.
Welcome back to another edition of Hometown Heroes on Family Life. I'm Mark Webster. This week's guest is Doug Rifenburg of Victory Sports, a Western New York ministry advancing the gospel by distributing sports gear to youths, a role he seems to have been born to play. Here's part one.
Yeah, my dad, his name was Doug Rifenburg. My dad was an All-American at the University of Michigan football player. He won the national championship with Michigan back in 1947 and 48. After he got done playing there, he played for the Detroit Lions. So I was rooting for the Lions this year, too. Played there for one season, and then he blew out his knee and ended up coming to Buffalo. He was born and raised in Michigan, ended up coming to Buffalo and became a sportscaster. So my dad was one of the main guys on TV and radio for probably 30 years back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and covered the Buffalo Braves, the Buffalo Bills, the Buffalo Bisons, UB football. That was my dad. My mom actually was always involved in sports too. She was a phys ed instructor at Buff State, and she actually coached the cheerleading team there. And that cheerleading team actually became the first Buffalo Gills cheerleading team. So my mom actually launched the Buffalo Gills back in, I think that was in the early 60s.
Wow.
And they were one of the first NFL cheerleading teams.
You've carried on the family trade.
Yeah, I've tried. It's in our blood. The blue and maize is in our blood, and sports is in our blood. I played every sport growing up. I then went on to the University of Buffalo and played football for 2 years. And then I've been kind of in the sports industry in different businesses and sales for most of my career.
How did that all morph into Victory Sports?
Like 12 years ago, I launched our sports ministry program over at Eastern Hills Wesleyan Church. And we started running a floor hockey program through Upward. We ran flag football camps and leagues. And that just really opened my eyes to, number one, the power of sports to minister to kids. And also it opened my eyes a lot to the different levels of need that were out there. And so we had a lot of different families coming in and utilizing our programs, and some had the resources and had the equipment and many didn't. The gear started churning at that point. How could I help these kids and these families get the equipment that they needed in order to play the sports, where then they could receive that positive impact that comes from sports and the coaching and the mentoring that comes along with it? And how could I also turn that kind of into a ministry where we could also share the love of Jesus with people? And that's kind of the original concept of Victory Sports Global Outreach. We ended up launching officially in August of 2017.
I've had the privilege of doing some mission trips down to the Dominican Republic, where baseball is really big. And I saw firsthand, and no doubt you've seen it even more, the way that sports can be such a venue to greater things.
For sure. One of our missions is to help missionaries, to help churches that are going on missions trips. We've probably partnered with at least 12 different churches over the last few years. Some of our equipment has been sent to probably 18 different countries. It's funny, I coached youth sports and middle school and high school sports for years myself. And I always would talk to the parents and I let them know, like, there's certain things that are maybe going on in your kids' lives where they're never going to listen to you as a parent sometimes. But if a coach says something to them, their ears perk up and they listen to them. And so it might be something that a parent has been telling the kid for years, like, you got to eat your fruits and vegetables and your protein. And until a coach tells a kid to do it, it doesn't really sink in properly. And the same thing can be said about the gospel. Sometimes kids are raised in a church or raised in a home where mom and dad might be talking about Jesus and the gospel and church, but it never really sinks in. And then all of a sudden they see a professional athlete or a collegiate athlete praising God and giving God glory, or maybe it's one of their coaches that shares the love of Jesus to them, and it impacts them in a different way because they're going to listen to them as this role model. And that's where sports just becomes so powerful.
We've seen a lot of that lately, both in, say, pro football, and especially the college football playoffs, win or lose. We had a lot of athletes out there who are putting Christ first.
For sure. I mean, Jaden Daniels has been a great example of that. I think God was definitely with him this year to take him as far as they did as a rookie quarterback. I think the Bills, there's plenty of believers. I mean, every NFL team, every college team has that group of believers. But even Ohio State, listen, I'm a Michigan guy, so this is hard for me to say. But Ohio State was honestly one of those colleges that was probably the most forward with their outreach. I mean, right when camp started and college started back in the fall, Ohio State did this big revival on campus. And a lot of their top athletes were there. there, and they had music and worship, and they praised Jesus, and they had tons of college athletes or college students come to accept Jesus through that. I find it very difficult to give Ohio State any praise, but when you're praising the Lord and lifting him up and helping to lead people to him, I can't do anything but give them props for that.
Yeah, absolutely. The scripture tells us that the fields are ripe, and maybe that includes football fields and baseball fields.
It's definitely ripe. Kids are open to listening to coaches and fellow athletes and leaders on teams. That's where it's always so important for like a team to have a really strong Christian captain or leader that's outspoken and isn't ashamed to share the love of Jesus with their teammates.
That's Doug Rifenburg with the Western New York ministry Victory Sports. In part 2 next week, stories from the field where they've brought the love of Christ through sports. Please join us again next time as we search for your home, your town, your hero. It's Hometown Heroes on Family Life.
Thank you for listening to this Family Life News podcast. If you've been encouraged by what you've heard, please share it with others and click the subscribe button to automatically receive future episodes. Family Life is a listener-supported ministry. Podcasts like this are made possible by your financial partnership. Find out more at familylife.org.